Next, we'll look at how to create a lesson using Moodle. Now, in Moodle, a lesson is a very specific thing where you can add content, you can drop questions in between, you can guide the user to alternate locations depending on how well they do in answering the questions. So to start with, of course, you're going to click Add an Activity or Resource, find Lesson. Information about it appears on the right. You're going to click the Add button at the bottom of the screen. Okay, the lesson needs a name. Notice that this is one of the few modules that does not require a description. You do have appearance features. Now, this first one allows you to add an outside file. It could be a PowerPoint, a graphic file, a Word file, whatever kind of file you'd like, and this file would pop up at the beginning of the lesson. So it would be one way to provide content for the lesson. And once you do this, there would be a link throughout the lesson for people to access that information again. As you move through the lesson, you can have a progress bar displayed if you'd like. If you change this to yes, it will tell them how far into the lesson they are, how much they have left to go. Display an ongoing score, so if this particular lesson was worth 30 points, and as a user accumulated points, that total would be shown. Display a left menu. What this means is the menu on the left would allow them to jump around to any page they wanted within the lesson, and you can choose to display that if you'd like. If you'd rather force them through in a certain path, you're going to leave that set to no. The next option is related to the one we just talked about. This says minimum grade to display the menu. So if this is set, if you say that we set this to 80%, or 90% say, now the student is going to have to go through the entire lesson, score at least a 90 before they can revisit and see those pages in random, or see those pages displayed so that they could jump kind of in a random order to anywhere in that particular lesson. Now this is actually a reasonable setting because it allows somebody to come back in and review the work after you feel that they've mastered a certain percentage of the content. We have a slideshow option here. That's just a different format for presenting it. It looks more like a presentation. Maximum number of answers. So this would be the largest number of answers to any one question. So if you're giving multiple choice with 4 possible answers, it would be 4. If there were 6 possible answers, it would be 6. If it was all true and false, you'd probably put 2. Use default feedback. When you create questions, you can enter the feedback for incorrect or correct answers, but if you choose not to do that, if you leave those areas blank, it will use default feedback, something like that's the wrong answer or that's the correct answer, and links to next activity. So when a person completes this, you can provide them a link to another lesson or a different activity within the Moodle if you'd like. Availability. This is the date that they can first access it. This is the deadline or the last date that they can access it, and you would have to enable both of those and then set the information. You can enable a time limit. So if you have a lesson and you feel that students should be able to complete it in a certain amount of time, you can type the minutes in here. We'll say this one's going to be 35 minutes and then enable it over here. Is this lesson password protected? So if you would like to prevent students from entering the lesson early, one way to do that is simply to put a separate password on the particular lesson and then not distribute that password until they're in class with you. Of course, if you're having them do this lesson independently at home, then this doesn't make as much sense unless you're going to send out an email at a certain time with the password included. Prerequisite lessons. So if you had built other lessons in here and they needed to complete a particular lesson before they came to this one, the lessons would be listed here and you could select it. Or you can simply say a certain amount of time must be spent on this lesson. So if you'd chosen, say, lesson 1 over here as a prerequisite, then you'd have to decide, well, what constitutes successfully completing that. It could be time spent on it. So you could say if you spent 30 minutes here on lesson 1, then you can access this lesson. You could check this for completed, meaning that they had to actually have gotten to the end of that lesson, or you could put a grade in here saying they should have reached a certain score. Technically, you can use all 3 of these or any combination of these at the same time, but it may make sense to just use one depending on which one you pick. Next, we have flow control. This setting determines whether a student can review. So once they've completed the lesson, can they come back and look at it again? If you want them to be able to do that, you need to set that first setting to yes. Provide an option to try a question again. So if a student picks an incorrect answer to a question, do you want them to have the opportunity at that point to make a second guess or a third guess? And you'd have to set this one to yes. Maximum number of attempts. So you have options in there as to how many times they can try a particular question. Action after correct answer. Now, normally you would just leave this to follow the lesson path, and you'll see how to set the lesson path a little later once we get this container created. But basically, if you could also let them see any page or any unanswered page in the lesson. I don't find this particularly useful. I guess if you had 30 pages in there and some of them were had the same content or the same theme, you could just have them see. You could just have them randomly get to one of those pages if the order didn't matter. And this is related to that. It's asking you how many of the pages to actually show to them. Normally, I would just leave this to follow normal path and you'd be set. I think you've designed the lesson for a reason, so giving up that control doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You come to the grading module. It's how many points for the grade. You can put it in a particular grading category. Is it a practice lesson, yes or no? Are you using custom scoring, yes or no? Do you allow retakes, yes or no? Handling of retakes, and once you set that to yes, you can say yes, use the average, or use the maximum. The last setting is the minimum number of questions to use in the grade calculation. This is a little tricky, but normally if you'd created 5 questions, you could just simply set this to 5, meaning that they had to complete all 5. You could set it to 4, in which case they would use all 5 if 5 were answered, but if only 4 were answered, it would calculate it, but as if on 5 questions. So if you got all 4 right, didn't answer the 5th, you'd be given a score of 80. Okay, this also, if you have more than one content page, and we'll look at that in just a minute, then you're going to leave that set to 0. Just something you should know. Okay, common module settings. Of course, this is just our hide or show setting. And once you're done with that, you click Save and return to the course, and your lesson shell will be created.